which they decide whether your paper is worth sending to reviewers in the first place. So that's the preliminary round, and that is something that we need to get through first. Now, what happens at the reviewer stage depends on the science, depends on the substance of your paper. I have no qualifications to talk about that. But as I said, if you put into practice what I will share with you, if you prepare your paper very, very carefully and the way the journal wants it, then you will almost always clear the opening round. Anyway, so let us get down to the nitty-gritty of all these. Now, one of the first thing, in fact, what distinguishes science from arts is the emphasis science places on measurement, on measuring, on counting. So which means that you collect data, and in your paper, of course, you not only present your data, but you also interpret it. So I'm going to talk in this session about how do you present your data? How do you express data in which is essentially numerical? So that is what I'm going to start with. So let me just start on this. So you can see my screen with a slide, develop a feel for numbers.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let me begin with a few simple questions. Now, this is a statement. I don't know whether you would agree with it. It contains, it may be true, it may not be true, but I'm sure most of you, I mean, all of you will know that this is wrong. And why it's wrong? It cannot be 65 milligrams. It has to be 65 kilograms. The point is that when you are presenting data, there are some numbers of which you have an intuitive understanding, and as have your readers or your listeners, but not that intuitive understanding doesn't extend to every domain. So that is what I'm getting at here. So maybe you were quite confident that the first statement was wrong, and you could also have corrected it saying that yes, it's 65 kilograms. Now, some of you will also be able to say with equal confidence that this too is wrong. And why? Because it's not 2.5 milligrams, but 2.5 grams. But may not, I mean, some of you may not have been as sure. Or some of you will, of course, get this right away. Some of you may not get it. Again, some of you will know how many calories are typically we need to consume. Some won't. So what I'm trying to get at here is, as you progressively move away from the domain with which you are familiar, the domain of which you have intuitive quantitative understanding, you become less and less sure. So what you as a researcher, when you are writing a paper, when you are making a presentation, you have to get your readers or your listeners take in or pass, you have to pass on the familiarity or the understanding that you have developed over time because you have undertaken that project, because you have undertaken that research. And that is what good quantitative presentation is all about. It is also full of very clear-cut conventions and rules. For example, what should be in capitals, what should be in lowercase, should there be a space, should there be no space. So all these are things that we will get into. Now, this understanding I was talking about, see this slide. Now, unless you have some understanding of typically what is the productivity of a field, if you are growing rice, for instance, how much rice you can expect to get from 1 hectare of land. Now, because my background, as was mentioned in the introduction, is agricultural, now I could see right away that this is absurd. Because if all India average is about 2.5 tons per hectare, the total rice production from the coastal states, which means there are more than one, cannot be just 15.36 metric tons. My guess is that it is not so much as metric as must have been million tons. But unless you have that understanding, this mistake will escape you. So how do you present data? For instance, take this statement. It's fairly recent. So if you pour over these numbers, then you will begin to get some understanding of our energy basket. But instead, if you present it in this way, that you say it's roughly it was so much, and that was the exact distribution. So now you can see at a glance, in fact, it would have been even better if I were to convert this as a pie chart. So what you will see at a glance that yes, we are heavily dependent on coal, but we have sizable proportions of renewables, which is in fact increasing, and we have hydro also. So compared to the previous slide, this slide is easier to take in because you have to grapple with fewer number of digits. So the load on your working memory is much less here, because instead of absolute numbers, you are giving percentage values. So the number of digit comes down, and it's easier for us to grasp that. So that is something that you need to keep in mind, that very often this would work, that instead of giving large numbers, you can reduce the number of digits either by converting them into percentage or by changing the unit. For instance, instead of saying 10,000 kilograms, you could say 10 tons. Straight away, you have reduced the number of digits. Now, numbers in the running text, which is what the first half of this presentation is all about. Now, you can see these are some statements you can see in running text, but there are some errors in this because they are against the conventions that are followed in expressing numbers. For instance, one of the common things that I come across, I earn my living copy editing research papers for publications, and I've drawn on that quite a bit on this presentation. So very often I see this, that when the writer is talking about a decrease, even then the writer uses the expression times. Like 3 times less. Now, what is 3 times less? Because times has to go with multiplication, and multiplication implies increase. So it would have been better off writing a third, not 3 times less. So avoid that. Likewise, when you express numbers, these are three things that you must observe, that you must, wherever applicable, you must include the units of measurement. You must give it only the precision of your numbers must match the precision of the measurement. I'll illustrate all of this. Now, for instance, I came across this table. Now, maybe some of you would be able to fill in these units. I have no clue how cutting speed is measured. That as given, no unit was specified. Feed rate, I don't know how feed rate is measured. How is it expressed? Or things like this. Do you really mean that the measurement was accurate to the second place of decimal? Oil content was 20.05%. No, I mean, you are much better off rounding it off and saying that it was 20%, or the sheet was 16 millimeters thick, and so on. Here's, so you see, depending on the way you have arrived at the number. So for instance, if you use more primitive weighing scales, then your weight will not be as accurate as something that you would get with more precise tools. You could use a micrometer, you can use a vernier. In fact, you could see this example. Now, this was the balance used, and as you could see, it is accurate to 4 place of decimals in gram. Although when it was expressed, that was correctly expressed 1.835, so it was rounded off. So that's fine. Although I have problems with GM, I'll come to that later. There's another example. You are familiar with this, on either ends of railway platforms, you see this height above MSL. Now, first of all, as you will notice, the unit is missing. All right, but we have fairly intuitive understandings. We know that it's bound to be meters. But 15.035 meters, 0.035, does it mean it's accurate to the nearest millimeter? It simply can't be. So that is why it is absurd to express a quantity like that when it cannot be matched by how it was measured. So SI style, that is System Internationale, which is what we are expected to follow. Typically, when you express a number, that is how you do it. That is, you give the quantity or the value, then there's a space, and then the unit. The unit itself consists of a prefix and a symbol. So I'll explain this. And depending on what prefix you are using, because some prefixes multiply the value, like kilo multiplies it by 1000, mega multiplies it by a million, giga by a billion, and so on. Or it can also divide. So deci is 1/10, centi is 100th, milli is 1000th, micro is 1 millionth, and so on. But the rule is that all dividers take lowercase. So cm, so c in centimeters, c is lowercase. millimeter, m is lowercase. Kilo is also lowercase. Remember, because very often I see kilo is capitalized. No, it's not capitalized. Beyond kilo, that is mega, giga, tera, exa, peta, they're all caps, but not kilo. K remains lowercase all the time. So as I said, this is typically the way you express numbers. There's a quantity, there's a space, and there's a symbol. Symbol for mass is G, remember that. But there are exceptions. Percent is typically set close to the number. Currency symbol and a quantity always without a space. Geographic coordinates always without a space. So there are some exceptions. Normally there is a space, but some cases there is no space. For instance, if it's a currency symbol rupee, then there is no space, but INR, then there will be a space. So this K or M, these are prefixes, micro, exa. So you see, that's the problem here, that the space is missing. Whereas you must have always a space between the number and the unit. So remember that. The space is missing again here, whereas it ought to have been inserted. Like 15 ml is fine, 15 space ml, although of course ml, L should have been caps. And as I said, K can never be capital, it has to be lowercase. So remember that, and there are no hyphens in SI systems. Remember that these, whether it's mm, whether it's K, these are symbols, they are not abbreviations. IN for inch is an abbreviation. FT for foot is an abbreviation. But cm for centimeter is not an abbreviation, it's a symbol. And because of that, they have no plural forms. So 2 kms is wrong, 5 kgs, kgs is totally wrong. No, you can't have that. Nor do they take a dot. Sometimes symbols are capitals, especially when they have been named after people. Sometimes they're small. But when the units are spelled out, they lose their capitals. So as I said, I was coming to that. Now GM, no, that's not the symbol for mass. Symbol for mass is just G, not GM. However, you can use these symbols only when they're accompanied by a number. So you could say 34 kg, that's fine. But weight was measured in kilograms because you have not said how many kilograms. So remember that. You can't say weight was measured in kg or length was measured in cm. No. Weight was measured in kilograms, length was measured in centimeters or millimeters, whatever. So remember that. The exception is in tables, because in tables, space is always a problem. So yes, in tables, especially in the row heading or a column heading, you can use just the symbols. Likewise, as I said, although we try to keep the number of digits fewer, but then there is, sometimes we can't do that. And then another rule kicks in, that these multi-digit figures need to be split. So how do we split it and where? Now, because we are Indians, we tend to think in large numbers in terms of lakhs and crores, but that is not the international convention. International system is thousands, millions, billions, trillions, and so on. So that is why this 6-digit figure is read as 123,456, not 1,23,456, or 1,234,567, not 12,34,000, and so on. Now, whether you use a comma or a space, now that is a matter of style. Some journals use a comma, some journals use a space. And if you are using a space, it better be what we call non-breaking space. So this number should not be split across two lines. And that is what you get by non-breaking space. So remember where you need to put the separators. For instance, here you see it's done correctly. 13,616,593, 585,727. So that's fine. That is correct. But in this case, it is not. Multi-digit numbers, the author has not bothered to split them. Because if you group them, again, it helps in understanding them easily. That is the whole point of this. Up to 4 digits, you don't need a comma. So that is correct. But this 3,000 is wrong. Up to 4 digits, no separator. Likewise, you must not allow the unit to become separated from its quantity. You can't have the quantity on ending one line and the unit carrying over to next line. That is not correct. Here again, non-breaking space is useful. If you come across this situation, you might be tempted to press enter after at to 4660 to the next line, but don't do that. Don't press enter, because when you press enter, you are creating a new paragraph. So it is best to replace this ordinary space between 660 and NM with non-breaking space. So you see, that's again the problem. First line is fine, 1 equivalent, but 1.5 has ended a line, equiv has moved to the next line. That should have been corrected. Here it's even across 2 columns. The unit itself is moving into 2 columns. That should have been together. Micrograms per cubic meter. All should have been together. Then when you're expressing a range, so you require 2 numbers. And what comes between them is what we call the n dash, which is slightly longer than a hyphen. And you don't repeat the units. So 150-200 kilograms, not 150 kg, then dash, then 200 and kg. No. Except when there is no space. So percent, currency, they need to be repeated. So you see, rupee symbol, if you are using, you will have to repeat it because there is no gap between the rupee symbol and the sum that follows. But if you are using RS or INR, then you need not repeat that. So these are the kind of things that I'm talking about. These are trivial. And the kind of papers that you would write, they will be typically scientific and technical text. So we don't spell it out percent, but you use the symbol. But you can't write percentage as symbol and AGE. So you see here, it's percent, then suddenly there's a sign that's not consistent. Likewise, this needs to be close to the number, 98%, not 98 space percent. And as I said, percent sign needs to be repeated, 52% to 55%, 3% to 4.5%, and so on. But the question is even more important. Okay, you can set it close, you can put a space, percent, 1 word, percent, 2 words. These are important, but not as important as this. So what do you understand by this. The level of access to potable water in India varies from 20%. Do you know what the author really means here? I often ask this question, and it's not often that I get the right answer because the author simply has not made it clear. What the author really meant was that he's talking about the number of households. 20% of households in Bihar have access to potable water, and that figure goes as high as 95.5% households in Himachal Pradesh. Or take another example. The Maharashtra accounts for over 80% of total export of mango, but 80% of what? 80% in terms of tonnage, that is the weight of mangoes exported, or 80% in terms of foreign exchange earned. That is not specified by the author. So that is something you need to keep in mind. So here again, you see that's a hyphen. That is not correct because it's a range. So it has to be n dash for, you see, it's slightly longer than a hyphen. Likewise, there is a minus sign. So when you are using these expressions, you have to use the minus sign, not a hyphen. See, it is h raised to minus 1. It is not h raised to hyphen 1. You can see here, minus sign is longer than a hyphen. Here also is the same thing, minus 52.2. No, it's not hyphen, it's range. The geographic coordinates, typically how you express them, you always put the latitude first and then longitude, and you need the correct symbols. That's a degree, prime for minutes, double prime for seconds. And you don't actually mention the words latitude and longitude, neither spelled out nor abbreviated. And there is no space. So you see, typically that is how it will be. This is wrong. It's degrees, there shouldn't be any space, but symbols are correct, but you don't need to say latitude and longitude. Because when you are specifying whether it's south or north, it has to be latitude. When you are saying whether it's east or west, it has to be longitude. And don't use quotation marks where you need to use prime and double prime. So you see, these are quotation marks, and that is not acceptable. It has to be degree, prime, and double prime. So degrees, arc, minutes, arc, seconds. Always north or south first, then east or west. Multiplication sign. Multiplication sign is not letter X. Whether it's capital or lowercase, that is still wrong. You have to use the proper multiplication sign. Likewise, you need to give a space on either side of mathematical operators, whether it's multiplication, whether it's equals. There has to be a space on either side. You can see here, that's wrong. Equal sign needs a space on either side. Now, these were more or less absolute rules. There are some disagreements, but they are minor. But here, this is something as a recommendation. It's not as though it's wrong. That if you're talking about financial years, you're not talking about calendar years, it is better to use a slash rather than a hyphen. If you're talking of financial years, if you're talking of academic years, if you're talking of crop years, whatever, slash is better than a dash. Same thing here. Likewise, numbers. No, we don't mention the word numbers. This is a very unidiomatic, but quite a characteristic of Indian English. And you don't write 360,000 numbers, just 360,000. Typically inventories, chairs, 12 numbers. No, that's wrong. Chairs, 12 or 12 chairs, not chairs, 12 number. Now, small t is the official symbol for ton. And you don't have to say metric ton because TONNE is metric. Capital M, small t is for million tons, although it's safer to simply spell it out. People may not always get this nicety. But TON is not the same as TONNE, depending on whether it's a short ton or UK ton or US ton, it could be different. You see here, even in within this, it is ton, and then same report is tons. That's not correct. Now L for liter, again, it's a standard recommended by SI system. Some publishers follow it, some publishers don't. And the convention is because this L may be mistaken for numeral 1. So although in Japan, they have another solution. Likewise, a convention is you don't start a sentence with a figure, with a numeral. And you'll have to spell it out. And if you do, then you use a hyphen. So you see here, the sentence is starting 1580 tons. So you can rephrase it. Or again, sentence is starting with a number 53 to 55. No, you can change it around and say, move it inside the sentence rather than beginning a sentence. Now the words million or billion or lakh or crores even, they don't carry S so long as you are specifying a quantity. So this is correct, a total of 9.339 lakh, not lakhs, but this is incorrect. 3.7 is already specified, so 3.7 lakh, not lakhs. 15 lakh is correct. Here it's correct because it's in column head. That's also correct. No number has been specified. Now, another thing you need to keep in mind, if you are using about, then that about must be followed by a rounded number. Approximately is little more precise than about. And about and around, it's just US, UK difference. So you see here, exact number of articles has been specified, 147,537. So why about? They're not about, it's the exact number. So either you round it off, saying about 153,000, or add approximately and round it off a little less, whatever. But you can't have about followed by an precise number. Roman numbers, you cannot have them in ordinal forms. If it's 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever, it can't be in Roman numbers. Likewise, you can't have symbols and spelled out versions or mathematical operators all together. No. So either all symbols or you spell it out. You can't have, for instance, ML, that's a symbol, but hour is not a symbol. So that's wrong. Now, more to do with English, that if you're using from, you must use to. If you're using between, you must use and, or you could use a dash, but you can't again mix up. No, between followed by a dash is not correct. It has to be from, to, or between, and. So remember that. See here, between two, that's not right. From, dash, no, that's not right either. So here the first one is wrong. Between 20-25 degrees Celsius, no. Between 30% and 65%. Between and, that's correct. Postal codes also, remember that postal codes is not associated with district. It is not associated with state. In India, it has to be associated with the name of the post office. So Maharashtra 400019, no, it has to be Mumbai. Likewise, when you are writing, ordinary writing, you don't require the placeholder 0. If it's single digit, so be it. You are not creating a spreadsheet. That's a different matter. Correct symbols, degree symbol. Very often I see people don't get the degree symbol correct. You can see that. This is the correct one. Round, perfect circle. It's not a superscript O, it's not superscript 0. Likewise, I say multiplication sign is not letter X. It has to be proper multiplication sign. So how do you get these symbols? If you are using Windows, you can use a character map. And depending on the font that you have chosen, you can see what all symbols are available. Or you could use the shortcuts in Windows. So essentially what you do is minus sign. Suppose you want a minus sign, you type 2212 and then immediately press Alt X. The moment you press Alt X, this 2212 will change into the minus sign. Or you could use insert symbol, and then there are these special characters. So there are various ways of doing that. Now remember that for these are the official symbols. D for D, H, not HR, not HR dot, just H. MIN, not MIN dot. But for larger ones, it varies. Some say WK, some say W, whatever. So there's no official. But here, as you have seen, it has to be small h, MIN, and S. So liters per second, that's correct. So here are some good sources. This is an extensive website. You will get information about numbers in all kinds of different trades or domains. So that's you might want to pursue it. Also, there's Physical Measurement Laboratory in the US. They have a useful checklist for numbers. And then there are any number of good books. So what I have done here, I mean, these are the books I would recommend, not all, whatever. And this is the SI official handbook. So what I have done is I have given the bibliographic information on these books, authors, year, publication, publisher, so on. So I'll go over it. I will be happy to share this presentation with you in PDF. If you just email me, that's fine. So remember, you are technologists, from a preeminent institute. So you should know how to express numbers accurately and get a sense of these numbers. So far we have been talking about numbers as they occur in isolated sentences. Now we need to go over to how do you express numbers in tables. So I'll stop sharing for a minute and then go on to the next one. So here we are going to talk about how do you express numbers in tables. So let me start sharing my screen. So that's number in formation. So are you seeing this slide with a line expressing different numbers?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now let's see, here are these numbers, and here, as you could see, they have been arranged one after the other. They have not been put in a column. It's not a column of numbers. But in tables, we have numbers in columns. So how would you arrange these numbers in a column? So would you arrange them like that? Or like this? So that is the second option. The third option. That's a fourth option. So what I would like you to do in a chat box, you have to just type one number. You type 1 if you will go for preference for the first option. Just type 2 in the chat box if you will go for the second option. Type 3 in the chat box if you prefer the third option, and type 4 in the chat box if you prefer the fourth option. So have you done that? Okay, now let's see the logic of this. Now you see, this is in fact from your own library. But what I was really surprised to see is that the numbers have been left aligned, whereas they're all referring to the same thing. They're all number of or of these kind of documents. So they need to be right aligned. So let's see. This is in fact a published table. Now I'm just going to focus on one particular column here. You can see that numbers have been centered, which is of course never correct. You don't arrange tables, columns in centered alignment. So that's, you see, centered. But what we need to do is we need to right align them. Not only that, as you could see, there is the multi-digit numbers and they have been expressed in milligrams. Of course, because pollen consumption is a small quantity, so milligrams is fine. But since there are multi-digit numbers, best is to convert them to grams. And then, of course, align them by the decimal, not centered. So that is what you need to keep in mind. So we'll see how we make tables. You can see here, there are so many ways in which you take this simple thing as table number and a title. Such a variety of these. So what is important here is within a document, whether it's your thesis, whether it's your paper, whether it's your project report, whatever style that you choose, it needs to be consistent for all the tables. You see the differences. Some tables, in some cases, the table number is in Roman, some in Arabic. Of course, Arabic is to be preferred. In some, the word table is entirely in capital letters, which is not a good idea. It should be in lowercase letters. In some cases, there is a dot between table number and the title that follows. Sometimes the table and the title are in bold. Then the case, sometimes some have used what we call the title case. Every word begins with a capital letter. Again, you should prefer sentence case, so minimize capitals. But what is important is that you follow a consistent system, whether it should be a colon, whether it should be a space, whatever. So you see all these, and again, sometimes different publishers have their own preferences. Some prefer colon, some prefer dot, some prefer nothing. Some prefer a new line. For instance, APA style is new line, American Psychological Association. Then the title case and sentence case. So that's about so you have all these options. So sometimes they end in full stop, sometimes they don't end in full stop. So these are comparatively trivial things, but where we use tables. So we have tables either to store our data or when you are using the findings. We also use tables when the exact value is important. Otherwise, we could have used a graph. Tables also allow us to show many variables within a single table, which is not always possible with charts and graphs. And if our data has a very wide range, then again, that's not a problem for tables, but it can be a problem for graphs because we don't know what scale to use. So when you use, when you convert your data in the form of a table, these are some of the things that you need to keep in mind. What are the typical parts of a table, how you should choose the order of rows and columns, alignment, and so on. So we'll talk about all this. So table have a number and a title. See, even simple things, there could be disagreement. Now, for instance, let's say there's only one table in your document. Then what do you do? So some publishers would say even then you should give a number, say table 1. And in fact, I prefer that solution. But there are equally some publishers who say in that case, don't give a number and simply refer to it as table, accompanying table, or table above or table below, whatever. How do you indicate footnotes? What do you do when you don't have data for a particular cell? So all these are things that you need to know if you want to present tables in a systematic way. So all these, so one thing you could do is, if you have, it's left to you, I would suggest that if all the numbers in a table share a common unit, then it is important to make that unit a part of the table title and to emphasize it by putting it in boldface. And if your table, if your data are in a time series or if they refer to a particular time period, then that also needs to be mentioned in the table title. Now there could be a head note which applies to the entire table as against a footnote which applies only to particular cells within a table. And then we have row and column headings. Typically they are singular. So for instance, if you have table in which you have given the weather data for from January to December, so the leftmost column will be headed month, not months, because each row is only 1 month. And sometimes the units of measurement also go within the headings, whether column headings or row headings. You may also have subheadings. Then how do you indicate those? And how do you align them vertically? So we'll see all that. So you see the problem here. In this table, some column heads run to, now there's one column head running to 4 lines. This is running to 3 lines. This is running to 2 lines. And this is running to only 1 line. Because they have been aligned from the top, there is so much gap when there is only 1 line. There is so little gap when there's 4 lines. And then there's the intermediate gaps. So which is not a good idea. So that is why you should always align column heads from bottom. Nor should you use this sort of solution. Don't put a slash and put 2 words there. No. So here you see the same problem because it's top aligned. So prefer bottom aligned. So there's a consistent gap between the column head and the body of the column. Likewise, sometimes as you see, you will have a subheadings. So there are sub columns within a column. In that case, we use rules, horizontal lines for sub columns or some other devices for row heading, bold, space, and so on. So you see here, that's a spanner rule or a straddle rule, which indicates that there's 2 sub columns of a single column. Now, sometimes there'll be a mismatch. That is, the column headings will be very wide, column body will be narrow, or it could be the other way around. So what do you do? So it looks kind of messy. So instead, then you left align the column heads. So then it appears neater. Now, what do you do when you have footnotes for tables? The general convention is that since your table, the data are all numerical, it is better to use letters of the alphabet for footnote markers rather than numbers, because the number, although superscript, sometimes the formatting is lost and then the number moves into the body of the cell, which can be dangerous. Also, stars are best used only for this function. That is when you are indicating the levels of probability. So keep stars for that. So I'll illustrate this with examples. And any footnote marker, you make it superscript, you make it bold, and you make it italics. Bold because it stands out, italics because it slopes to the right. So you get a little space between the number and the footnote. And how do you place the footnotes? How do you assign them? You follow the reading order as we read, that is from top to bottom, left to right. I will illustrate that. Now, footnotes to tables are always placed at the bottom of a page, at the bottom of a table, not at the bottom of a page. Now, when you explain the footnote below the table, at the bottom of a table, again put the same marker. You start the explanation with a lowercase letter and you don't need any terminal punctuation. nor do you need to run the footnotes as separate lines. I will illustrate all this here. As you could see, we have 4 footnotes here. So we have used letters of the alphabet. We have assigned them in the reading order from top to bottom, left to right. So that's why this is A, this is B, this is C, this is D. As you could see, they are bold, they are italicized, and they are superscript. At the bottom of the table, when you explain them, then again you use the same symbol, superscript, bold, italics. You start your explanation with a lowercase letter. So T in turbines is not capital T, it's small t. And there is only a minor, very small space, superscript space between the symbol and the explanation. The symbols are run one after the other, not separate lines. And the explanations are not followed by a dot. They are not complete sentences. You don't need those dots. Although, as I said, some publishers may have a different style. So APA, that's American Psychological Association, typically in social sciences, that's followed. You are mostly in physical sciences, you have a different style guide. Typically, I'm sure you are probably using, just excuse me. Yeah. So depending on the style. So how do you then design tables? So first rule is that you should always refer to a table and not just by its number, but say something about that table. Either you summarize or you give the highlight. Best to plan a table on paper first, so you can decide which row, what should go in rows, what should go in columns, how the columns should be ordered, how the rows should be ordered, and what is the proper alignment for the column. How do you handle? Don't leave any cell blank, because if you leave a cell blank, the reader has no means of knowing whether it's blank by design, that is you have left it blank on purpose, or whether you just forgot to type the value. Now, typically, you have numbers have to be compared. Then it is best to they are kept side by side. And if there is one particular column or one particular row against which rest of the numbers are to be compared, then you should highlight that. So here you see this air quality data, particulate matter, based mostly on fine particulate matter. So all these values will make sense if you compare them against the WHO guideline, which is 10 micrograms per cubic meter. So you can, once you know that, then you know which cities are good air quality, which cities are bad air quality. So that is why that particular row has been highlighted. When you put superscript, then that is how they need to align. They're centered on the capital height. Likewise, when you use superscripts, best to use them from the character map rather than typing the superscript, typing the number, selecting it, and making it a superscript. That gives you a lighter looking superscript. So always choose from the character map. Now comparisons, again, it depends. What's the variation? What's the range? So if they are within an order of magnitude, you keep the columns side by side. If there's a wide variation, then you can put them in a column. When you see a table and you see lots of phrases or symbols occurring again and again, in this case, for instance, the title itself starts with percentage. If that is the case, why the word percent is repeated so many times? You don't need it. Likewise here, why it's repeated? You could have categorized it. So I'll show you some examples. Also get rid of this habit that many of you have, that when you are giving a table, the first column is always of serial number where it's applicable. No, you don't need serial numbers. Most of the time, you don't need them, so don't include them. Alignment, we started this discussion with alignment, and these are the typical rules for aligning columns. Depending on whether they are sharing a unit and depending on whether they are integers or decimals. Centered alignment is never followed except for cells without data. Those are centered on the column, just to make sure that they are not true members of that column. And we never use justified alignment in columns. Why? See here, because justified alignment makes the text align on the right also. And because of that, it puts so much white space between words. So that's why don't use justified alignment in column headings, and of course not in the body of the text. So here you see the numbers are sharing a unit. What is that unit? Daily rate. So you don't center them. They must be right aligned so that units come below units, tens come below tens. This is what I was referring to when I showed you the table about library holdings. They're all sharing a common unit, number of entities. So they must be right aligned. If there are decimals, then you need to use decimal align. Why? You see here, now this 2.5 or 1.5, at a glance, they look larger than 12 because it's not been decimally aligned. So they need to be decimally aligned. Whereas if the units are not shared, so like here, the first row refers to population in millions, third row refers to precipitation in millimeters, and so on. So then you don't right align them. You must left align them to emphasize the fact that they have no arithmetical relationship. You don't add them up as a total. You can't compare the magnitudes. So they are different, apples and oranges. So left alignment. Otherwise, you get absurd posters like that. These are different things. They're referring to different things. What's the point of this total? 4916 is total of what? And why centered alignment is bad? See, it distorts the order of magnitude. So it's easier. Now you can see at a glance that there is a lot of variation in the resources, but it would have been easier if the numbers had been right aligned, not centered. Blank cells, what do? NA can mean not applicable, but it can also mean not available. ND can also means no date. So this is what I suggest. If you don't have any other guidance from the publishers, use these notations. In terms of designing the table, keep columns close together. Don't put a lot of gap between columns. You don't need vertical lines to separate every column from the next. You don't need horizontal lines to separate every row from the next. So you see like this, this becomes a collection of boxes. It's not a collection of boxes. It's a table. You don't need so many horizontal lines. You don't need so many vertical lines. If there are two columns, then this is one way you can put them closer. This is the same example that I showed you earlier. You could have switched the positions of the columns and right aligned one. So then it is close. So that's one way of doing it. As I said, keeps the column only as wide as necessary. Typically choose auto fit to contents. Don't have very wide columns because it's not needed. For instance, here you see there are 2-digit numbers here, moisture %. Why do you need so much space? And here weight is given in grams. So there's so many digits could have been given in milligrams. So keep columns close together, not like that. When there's two extremes, it becomes harder for readers to read across. So keep them closer. You don't have to shade alternate rows. They highlight the rows where no highlighting is required. After you have built a table, just take any row at random, read it across, and put the data in the form of a sentence, and see if you can construct a meaningful sentence by reading left to right in a particular row, because this will tell you whether something is missing, whether, for instance, you have forgotten to mention the unit, and so on. So do that. Then there are other cases, like how do you deal with unwieldy tables? Now, it depends why they are unwieldy. Is it because the columns are very wide? Is it because there are too many rows? So here are some possible solutions. As far as possible, don't split tables across pages. But if you do, then of course you will have to signal continued and so on. So for instance, in this case, there are too many rows, but the rows are narrow. So you can double them up. Repeat the column headings. So then table becomes more manageable. Or you could turn them into a landscape table so you get more width. So that's possible. You can turn them around. Large tables can be handled this way. It all depends. So now I want to show you a couple of tables and see, by applying these principles that I have shared with you, how you could make them a little more readable. Don't worry about the contents. You don't have to understand them. In fact, it will be better if you don't understand them, so you can focus mechanically on. So for instance, you see here this column, 2 columns, everything is showing plus. Why do you need it? Then there are so many times this repeated: facultative, 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 obligate, 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 so on. And we have no idea why these are arranged in this particular sequence. Whereas you can see that we can simply put a note and we can get rid of those 2 columns. We can simply say all 10 tested positive. Then you can have 2 subheadings, facultative and obligate. And then you can arrange them in descending order. So you can see at a glance what was high values, what were low values. So what I'm getting at is, don't be satisfied with the first draft that comes to your mind when you're preparing a table. Give it some thought, see how you can improve on it. There's another table that I want to show you. As published, you can see here, there's so much white space. So you can put your mind to it, apply your mind to it, and put it this way. So it all depends. I mean, I will send you this in PDF. You can see what's also, for instance, think whether it's a table or a list. Now take this particular instance. Now this is not really a table. This is a list. Why? Because see, these columns, they only read one way around. You can't swap them into, you can't make columns, what is in rows into columns, what is in columns into rows, and why they need to be aligned. No. So I would say this should have been better like that. Engine, make, model, colon, whatever, number of cylinders, colon, 1. There is no reason why this should all align on the left, because they're only meant to be read across, never along. So it's actually a list and should be presented as a list. Sometimes you wonder whether you really need a table at all. See here, I mean, how much data are you really giving it? You can simply write a sentence and give the same values within the text. You don't really need a table. There's not enough data to justify a table. Like that. There are so many columns, just one row. Why do you need it? You could have written it in the form of a sentence. Like before, I want to end this with some recommendation or sources. For instance, this is a very good comprehensive web page on all the things that we have been discussing is from UN documents. There are not too many books on, especially on tables. So I have found some, and it's really a good article. So that's what I would recommend. Tabular display, that's a good article, although it's dated, but it's still really quite useful. So remember, use the correct alignment. That correct alignment may be right aligned, maybe decimal aligned, maybe left aligned. If somebody asks you why you have put columns in that particular order, why you have put rows in that particular order, you need a good answer to that. Don't leave cell blank. Always say something about the table when it's first mentioned. So before we take a break, I will stop sharing. And if you have any questions or comments, you are most welcome. You can unmute yourself and ask. Okay, I can see that in the chat box, you get a good spread. But remember that there is a reason for choosing a particular alignment. So any questions at all? Anyone?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for delivering such a wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, sir, I just want to request that please share the PPT so that
Oh,
we
I will.
know all the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'll be happy to share the PPT.
Yeah, because when we will practice, only then we can remember all these.
Yeah, because too many details to
yes,
put
sir. Yes,
in one side. Absolutely.
Right, sir. Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
I have a question, sir. Just now you told us that we should be using a sentence for the
test sentence.
yes, sentence when the table has only one row or two rows, but having more columns. Sir, isn't it not easier for us to see and read and understand what the author is trying to say when it is in a table form? Sir, because if we write two sentences for that, maybe it will, people just might not be interested to look at it, or maybe they can just skip off. So why exactly do we need to put it in a sentence and not in the table, sir? That is what I want to understand, sir.
Okay. I'm glad you asked, because it also makes me aware of the perspective. Now, unconsciously, I'm here speaking from the perspective of a publisher or an editor.
Okay.
Because tables are harder to set than running text, and tables are also difficult to fit, because table, as far as possible, you should have the table on the same page on which the table is mentioned, which is not always possible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So to avoid some of these reasons, and because the data are not dense, I suggested that instead of that, you should put it in a sentence. If that is not a constraint, that's fine. I mean, your argument is as good as anybody else's.
Okay, sir. Thank you. So one more question is that suppose I have a design of something and I want to mention the dimensions somewhere. So I have seen in some of the literatures, they are represented in a table, and somewhere it is in sentence only. So what do you expect us to do?
For instance, let's say that there are different options that you are comparing. And one of the things you have varied is the dimension. So you have model A in which dimensions are, X, Y, Z millimeters. And you have another model in which they are A, B, C millimeters, whatever. So if you have a number of options that you have been changing the dimensions as a variable, then it might make better sense to put them in the form of a table. And of course, the results that because of what you got, because the dimensions were changed. But if it's simply a description of one particular model, then there is really no reason why you need to put it in a table, unless there are other particulars like the list that I showed you, that you want to give a number of details of that particular model, and dimension is just one such characteristic or detail. In that case, again, table will be a better option.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
Not at all.
So good morning.
Morning,
I had a
morning.
doubt.
Yes.
So in case of like the dimension example, should we like write it in a list, or will it be better if it is in sentence? And like when to use lists instead of table?
Sorry, no, tell me again.
I'm asking if when to use lists, or like.
Yeah, so I would say you use a list when you have, let's say, at least say 5 or 6 or more than 5 different attributes or variables. Then a list becomes easier to take in.
Yes.
But up to 3 or 4, yeah, it can be in a running sentence. And even there, when you are using a running sentence, avoid using respectively. You put the, say, like it was so many millimeters long, it weighed so many kilograms, and so on, rather than the numbers were X, Y, Z, and grams, milliliters, whatever, respectively. No, respectively, as far as possible, avoid it.
Okay. Also, and one more thing. You said about consistency throughout the document.
Yes, yes.
So I had one more doubt. Like while using in the first presentation, you told about from, to, between, and.
Yeah.
That also be consistent, like.
Oh, there, yes, it is. In fact, that is something more than consistent. This is simply, grammatically wrong.
Okay.
To say between and to is grammatically wrong. It's not idiomatic. It is not a matter of consistency. It is just plain wrong.
Okay.
Sir, there is one question in the chat box. So
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
reading that out.
Yeah,
Can we
okay.
start a sentence with mathematical or parameter symbol?
Yes, it's not a numeral, right? So, can you just give an example, or you can put it in the chat box?
Someone who has asked this question can speak directly to the.
Actually, I mean to ask that if there are, say, A, B, C parameters we are using for analysis, and somewhere I want to make a sentence. So can I start like capital A is something?
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, absolutely. I was saying that you shouldn't start with a number.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
I have a query, sir, that we earlier we have learned about like what you have explained to us in the APA, which you told, that American Psychological Association. But there are certain something called like Modern Language Association also for writing research papers. Apart from that, there are many different styles. Like if you're writing a blue book, sometimes we
blue book
talk
is
about
legal.
Yes, some AP style or some kind of medical association style.
Quite.
Is it what we explained today? Is it an amalgamation of different, which is right now accepted throughout for writing research paper, or is it only the AP's style which you explained in your presentation?
No. What I have explained to you are broadly across the guides.
Acceptable, basically.
Yeah. But there could be minor points of difference. You take a very simple example, that until its 10th edition, AMA, that is American Medical Association, always used to insist that when you give temperature, there should not be a gap between the quantity and the symbol degrees Celsius. But only in the 11th edition, the latest edition, now finally they have come in line with other style guides that yes, there needs to be a space between the number and degrees Celsius. So yes, on very minor points, there could be matters of difference, but not otherwise.
Okay, so there is another thing. So like sometimes we write certain letters, like we have seen the bureaucrats write letters to the ministers, or sometimes we write some kind of the writs. So in that case also we use a called a demi-official or the standard definition of the writings. Yes, sir. So can we use this format of writing some kind of tables, or the putting hash or end hashes in that, or is it only that is acceptable throughout for any kind of
absolutely
writing?
Yes.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Oh, welcome. Fine. So in that case, we can take up.
Sir, we have one more query in the
Yeah,
chat
yeah,
box.
sure. Yeah, most welcome.
Should we follow the same convention throughout the document, or can we vary? For
No,
example,
no.
use of and dash, or between and or from or to.
No, no. Within. No, wait. There are two things here. Now, n dash, yes, within a document. In fact, irrespective of that, if there is a range, it is better to use n dash rather than a hyphen. If you are using a minus sign, it is wrong to use a hyphen. You must use a minus sign. But as also the previous, while answering another question, I said that this between and, this is not a matter of consistency. It is simply a matter of correct idiom. So if you are using, it has to be always between A and B. So it doesn't matter what kind of document it is, or it. So there are, when I said that it should be consistent across documents, I was referring mainly to things which are a matter of aesthetics or choice. For instance, whether the word table, T-A-B-L-E, whether you want to print it entirely in capital letters, fine, it's your choice. But in that case, everywhere, whenever there is a table, you should have the word table in capital letters. That is what I meant. This sort of consistency I was talking about.
Sir, I also have a question. Could you please share your thoughts on writing effective figure legends?
Effective figure legends. Okay. One is always remember that both tables and figures, as far as possible, they should stand alone. That is, to make sense of a table or to make sense of a figure, readers ideally should not have to consult the rest of the text. So that is one. Now, when you are talking about figures or legends, sometimes, especially the problem comes when you have what we call multi-panel figures. That is, within one figure, there are smaller figures. Is that what you are asking about?
Yes, sir, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So best would be that, let's say figure 7. So the first few words in the caption should explain what all the panels are all about. So let's just, I'm giving you an example. Let's say figure 7, maximum and minimum variation in temperatures across 5 cities. And then A, Kanpur, B, Delhi, whatever. So when you have a multi-panel figure, you first explain what is common to all the panels, and then you come to the specific panels. Again, to get into details, again, publishers differ. Some use capital letters for panels, and they say so in their instruction to authors. Some use lowercase letters within brackets, and they say so in their instruction to authors. Now, some publishers put the description first, and then in brackets A, then in brackets B, and so on. Some publishers put the tag first, like A, comma, whatever the description, semicolon, B, comma, whatever the description, another semicolon, and so
on. Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Hello, sir. I have one doubt.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, sir. Suppose I have in my research paper, there are 5 or 6 parameters which I'm varying.
Okay.
And suppose my parameter A takes 3 values, my parameter B takes 5 values, my parameter C takes 2 values, and parameter D takes 9 values.
Okay.
Now, how will I? Now, since the number of parameters is 6 or 7, presenting in a form of sentences will be difficult. So we will definitely be choosing the path of tables or lists.
Right.
Now, how can I manage my columns and rows? Because one is taking 3 values, one is taking 5, another is 7.
Okay.
How can I manage my rows and columns here?
Okay. So one way to do that is to have a 2-column table. The left column will be for parameters. The right column will be for values. Now, within the left column, that is within the first column, you will have subheadings. So then you can have that, because as you said that each has different values, right? They are different parameters. Can you,
yes,
if you can tell me what the actual, just to indicate?
So suppose, sir, I have I have suppose 5 parameters A, B, C, D, E, and each can take suppose parameter A takes 1, 2, 3 as 3 values. Parameter B takes 35, 36, 37, 38, 39 as another parameter. Parameter C takes suppose 10, 11 as numbers, and then parameter D takes such numerical 7 different values. This kind of an example.
Okay, let me see. Correct me if I have not understood. Let me come up with another example. Let's say that you are studying the effect of temperature, a wide range of temperature on something, on electrical conductivity, whatever. And you have very low temperatures, let's say 0 to 5 degrees. Then you have moderate temperatures and you have extreme temperatures. So these are, let us say, your columns. So one column will be for low temperatures, one column will be for moderate temperatures, one column will be for extreme temperatures. Now, under each column, you will have whatever your data accompanied by any observation that you have. So as many columns as there are parameters, but the number of rows will keep changing, and that is fine.
That is fine, right, sir?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sir, I had a doubt. In the presentations, you showed some tables which had no horizontal lines in the tables.
Right. Yes.
So when should we use that?
In fact, I would say that ordinarily you just need 3 horizontal lines. One at the top of the table, that is above the row headings.
Yes.
One between the row headings and the body of the table, and one at the bottom of the last row. So that is end of the table. So ordinarily you need just these 3 lines.
Okay.
One above and below the row heads, column heads, and one at the after the last row.
Okay.
And if you're still particular, you should vary this. That is ideally, let's say you have 1 point thick line at the top, then half a point thick line or 1 point in 50% gray, something like that, at the second line, and the last line could be 1.5 points thick, or it could be a double line. So that is the end of the table.
Okay. And what about vertical lines in a table?
Oh, no, you should not use vertical lines.
Okay.
You can vary the space between columns, but don't give vertical lines.
Okay, sir.
Alt plus combinations are applicable to not so much Word, but to Windows. See, for instance, some work with Word, but not in PowerPoint. Because I see a question in the chat box. Alt plus combinations are applicable for MS Word only. Yes, in some cases, but not all. As I said, it's best to use this. If you are using these codes, then they will be irrespective of the software applications. So for instance, you take Alt 160, that's a non-breaking space. So Alt 160 will work whether it's MS Word, whether it's PowerPoint, whether it's Corel Draw, whatever, it will work. But some shortcuts will not, may be specific only to Microsoft Word. For instance, take the N dash. Now, either you could use Alt 0150 for N dash, which will work, as I said, across software packages. But a shortcut which is Control plus minus sign for N dash, that will work only in Word. Did that answer that question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, what time we will start the next session so that you can announce it? Yes, you can allow 15 minutes from now, and then we'll have the next session. Okay.
Sir,
yeah,
we can start at 12:45 as mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that is fine. That's
okay.
fine with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I request everyone to be in meeting only because we are not ending the meeting. So you can resume at 12:45. So no need to leave the meeting.
Fine. Okay.